Today I'd like to continue our journey through chapter 8 of the Gospel of Matthew. We've been talking about the idea of the uh, great storm that occurred in chapter 8 and Jesus calming that great storm. In the Gospel of Mark, a little contrast to how Matthew portrays it, Mark says Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. They woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" So in Mark, it's like Jesus is sleeping. Yeah, what's the deal here? We're perishing, and Jesus doesn't seem to care. Um, in Matthew 26, chapter 8, he said to them, "Why are you terrified, O you of little faith?" Then he got up, rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was great calm. So what Jesus is saying is we shouldn't be afraid. We should be people of faith. In Matthew, of course, the placing of this in the different miracle stories that he's relating in chapter 8 is a sign that, you've seen all these great miracles that I've done. I've cured all these people. I've healed them. Why should you worry about the storm? Do you not have faith in me? And this, of course, relates to us all as followers of Jesus. How much faith do we truly place in Jesus to help us when there are storms? Inevitably, there are going to be storms. There are going to be difficult times. There are going to be conflicts and challenges that we face in life. This happens to all of us in a variety of circumstances. And Jesus says, when you face those storms, if you face them with me, you need not be terrified. And so Jesus just gets up after he reminds them about the importance of faith and trust in him. He just gets up and from his sleeping position, so I guess he's standing up, and he rebukes the winds and the sea. He says, be calm, and the calm happens. You get the impression from Matthew in verse 26 that this calming happens really immediately. As soon as Jesus gets up, as soon as Jesus says this, there is a calm. And again, it relates to us as followers of Jesus. When do we feel the calm? When do we feel the peace? When do those storms that come within us, when do those storms get quelled? Is it when we turn to Jesus and say, "Jesus, this is a difficult circumstance, this is hard, I don't know if I can do it, but I need your help"? Do we then feel the peace? Do we then feel the calm? Do we then know that Jesus will be with us and that we can survive these difficult storms? And this is a parable that really applies to the church as a whole. A lot of times there are difficulties, as we know, in the church. There is corruption, there is scandal, there is evil. We see it all the time, not only in our political institutions, but also our social institutions and our church institutions. We see the corruption, we see the evil, we see people doing things that they should not be doing. We have suffered, of course, a tremendous scandal with the priest abuse crisis and how it was handled by the bishops. So all of these things give us pause and we say, this church has problems. This church has scandals. This church has corruption. This church has evil within it. So we acknowledge that and we turn to Jesus. We say, "Jesus, can you calm these storms? Can you lead us? Can you show us the way?" And Jesus has shown us the way by his life, by his words, by his example. But it's a question of our listening to Jesus, our faith in Jesus, our trust in the Lord, to calm those storms and to point in the right direction and show us the way that we should all be following. This story really indicates the status of the faith of the apostles. A lot of times I think we get the wrong idea of the apostles, that Jesus chose them and they were outstanding men of faith, and right from the beginning they understood what Jesus was saying, and they put all their trust in Jesus. They were willing to give their lives for Jesus. But initially, of course, this is not the picture that we see. We see the apostles confused, we see the apostles struggling, and there has to be, within each of the apostles, a growth in faith. We certainly see it even at the time of the resurrection in Thomas. We see it at the time of the crucifixion in Peter. We see these struggles in faith on the part of the apostles. And I think this helps us to relate to them even more completely. That they had these struggles, and yet Jesus was with them. He was physically present with them. Jesus certainly is with us spiritually. His presence is with us through the sacraments, through the community, through the Word of God, through outstanding examples of people of faith. The presence of Jesus is there, but there is a struggle to acknowledge that, to accept it, to listen to it. And certainly the apostles had that struggle, because here they are, Jesus is sleeping, the storm happens, and they have to wake Jesus up. They don't trust that because Jesus is there with them, that they will be okay. So again, that struggle of faith that they have and that we all have. In verse 27, the men, it says, were amazed and said, "What sort of man is this, whom even the winds and the sea obey?" That's an interesting question. What type of man is this? This is Jesus. This is an extraordinary man. This is the God-man. This is Jesus, the man of two natures, the divine nature and the human nature together as one person, Jesus Christ. But this is the struggle that we have to acknowledge what type of man this is. Is this the person we want to follow? Or do we want to follow someone else? And this is the struggle that we all have all the time. Should I follow Jesus completely? Should I hold back? What should I do? These are the difficult questions that certainly we all face. Very interesting when you look at this phraseology about the winds and the sea obeying this man. It has many echoes within the book of Psalms and within the Hebrew Scriptures. Certainly, we can reflect on God's power over threatening waters. Psalm 65, verse 8 says, "You still the roaming of the seas, the roaring of the waves, the tumult of the peoples." It is God who stills this, like the roaring of the seas. Who causes the roaring of the seas? Who stills it? Well, of course, there are the dynamic of the laws of nature, but ultimately, this certainly goes back to the Creator. Like those roaring seas that could easily devour us and overwhelm us, it is God who has established them like that, the roaring of the seas. And of course, we're all familiar with that today, with the idea of global warming and the flooding of our coastlines, the rising sea levels, the danger of floods. We see this all around us. But God also stills the tumult of the peoples. The people getting upset, people losing their direction. God stills that. Psalm 89, verse 10, "You rule the raging seas, you still its swelling waves." So again, you can just imagine people looking at those waves and saying, well, they could easily overwhelm me. We speak of those tremendous tidal waves, the tsunamis, and certainly it is the power of God, the divine power, that initiates them, and certainly gives us pause to be careful. Psalm 93, verses 3 and 4, "The flood has raised up, Lord, the flood has raised up its roar. The flood has raised its pounding waves, more powerful than the roar of many waters, more powerful than the breakers of the sea, powerful in the heavens is the Lord. So there was much power in the water, there was much power in the waves, but greater is the power of the Lord. And in Psalm 107, verse 29, hush the storm to a murmur, the waves of the sea were still. So again, the echoes of what Jesus did we see in the book of Psalms, we see in the Hebrew Scriptures, the stilling of the waters. The focus then becomes on the person of Jesus, as that question is asked. What type of man is this?